So thank you for joining us for today's presentation with Dr. Jessica Cooke Bailey and Dr. Jonathan Skarie and their colleagues in the Department of Population and Quantitative Health Sciences at Case Western Reserve. And they will be sharing more with us about glaucoma genetics in the Amish. To begin, I'd like to thank Andrea Waxmunsky, an integral member of our APASA Scholarship Committee. She is the one who manages the technology to make all of this possible, and we are so grateful to her for that. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we just ask that you save your questions for the end of the presentation or put them in the chat right now or as they come to you. And then our presenters will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion afterwards. If you do participate in the conversation after the presentation, your questions and comments will be recorded, and those recordings will be available to our members only on our newly designed website. You can check that out, as well as access previous APASA cafes. We have quite the archive developing there. If you're interested to access those, they're at www.amishstudies.org. And if you're joining us by phone, we just, and you would like to ask a question, you can unmute by pushing the star key and the number 6. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's speakers, Dr. Jonathan Skarie, who's an ophthalmologist and glaucoma specialist and a practicing surgeon at Ohio Eye Associates, and Dr. Jessica Cooke Bailey, an assistant professor with the School of Medicine at Case Western. Thank you and your colleagues and team for being here today and sharing your work with us.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to talk about this work today with all of you. I'll start out the presentation, but I'm going to share this with the presentation with various people that work on the data. I find it really helpful to have others present alongside. I think that it helps give a really cool perspective on all the different aspects of this type of work. And I also want to make sure that, you know, it's understood that this is nothing that's done by one person in particular, that we all really contribute to this. So here's an outline for what you can expect in the talk today. We're going to discuss what is glaucoma. We're going to talk about the primary goals of the GGLEAM study. We'll discuss community engagement, and then we'll relay with you what we've learned thus far, and then have a little summary. So I'm now going to turn it over to my co-investigator, Dr. Jonathan Skarie, if he's able to take control. John, are you there? Okay, here we go. Cool. Did that go?
Yep. Yeah, so thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. So I'm a practicing ophthalmologist and a glaucoma specialist. So I deal with glaucoma all day, every day. So I'm just going to run through a brief outline of what the disease actually is. It's a fairly common condition that can cause irreversible blindness. And one of the big problems is people are very asymptomatic often until it's too late. You can see in the representation here of what people kind of notice as glaucoma sets in, as it typically affects your peripheral vision. It's completely painless, and people may not notice as they lose this until it gets like it is on the right, and it's more of like a tunnel vision. And unfortunately, we can't reverse these damages. So it's very important to try to pick these things up early and try to prevent these situations from happening. All right, let's see. There we go. So like I said, it's very common, and with several million people in the US alone having glaucoma, and it's even more prevalent throughout the rest of the world. We have pretty good access to healthcare in the United States, and so people coming in for routine eye checks and things will notice this. But in a lot of the developing world where routine healthcare and preventative healthcare doesn't occur, it's even more common. And as you see in this graphic, about half the people who have glaucoma don't even know they have it, again, because it's asymptomatic until the late stages. What glaucoma actually is, it's a condition where the the optic nerve, which is the connection between the eye and the brain, is deteriorates over time. And I think this next graphic kind of shows us a little bit better. So the optic nerve, again, in the back part of the eye, is responsible for transmitting all the information the eye collects from a vision standpoint back to the brain. The eye is there to collect information, but vision actually happens in the brain itself. So if you lose the connection between the eye and the brain, even if the eye is collecting information, the brain's not receiving the signal, and we don't perceive vision. It's generally a disease of aging. It becomes more and more common as people do get older. And one of the big risk factors for it is high eye pressure. And we think this is the case because if pressure builds up in the eye, the nerve is the weak point, and that's where damage occurs. So really a lot of our treatment is targeted to lowering eye pressure. It's a complex thing to diagnose, though, because eye pressure isn't necessarily diagnostic for glaucoma. Lots of people out there have eye pressure out of the normal range and don't get glaucoma, and some people with normal eye pressures do get glaucoma. So we really have to assess the pressure in reference to the rest of the eye, and really assess the nerve tissue itself to see if there's any signs of damage or concern. And then we can assess the vision. We can do peripheral vision checks to see if people are losing their peripheral vision. So it really takes a pretty comprehensive eye exam to really determine if glaucoma is present or not and how severe it is. If we determine that we do need to treat it, it is all targeted towards eye pressure reduction at this point. But even with that, we still have some patients who decline and have poor vision over time. And like I said earlier, if you lose vision from glaucoma, we don't have technology or ways to reverse that damage at this point. So it's all about trying to catch it early and preventing that damage from occurring. And this problem's not going to get any better with the aging population. These numbers are just going to get larger and larger. So you can see the National Eye Institute has estimates that by 2050 we're going to be dealing with over 6 million people who have glaucoma in the United States. And again, throughout the world, that's an even more prevalent problem. This is a graph kind of emphasizing that early detection and early prevention. We don't know who's going to fall on what line without kind of watching and monitoring. So if we identify people who we think might get glaucoma, a lot of them may never have problems, but the ones that do, you can see if you intervene late here, you may slow down the process, but it doesn't always stop the process. Whereas if you can identify these people much earlier in their lives and intervene earlier, you're much more likely to let them maintain good vision throughout their lifespan. While they have glaucoma and have to deal with it, they may not have visual symptoms or visual effects that affect their life. All right, and just a statement that just emphasizes the reason we're doing this study, to really try to find ways of identifying these people sooner and earlier. And genetics is a big key to doing that. All right, I'll turn it back over to Jessica here to.
Thanks, John. I'm actually not sure. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to see if I actually have control now. Ooh, I do. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that introduction to glaucoma. So Dr. Skarie has obviously, devoted his life and his career to studying glaucoma. And I was able to connect in with some Amish work several years ago via Dr. Jonathan Haynes, who actually is on the Zoom with us today and has presented a couple months ago about some other of his work in the Ohio Amish. So we were able to look at some of the records that he had from prior studies where individuals had comprehensive eye examinations. And we were able to look at these charts, and the ophthalmologists that he was working with at the time had noted that several of the Amish had glaucoma. And so, because I study glaucoma genetics, I said, hey, is it okay if we, kind of check this out? Because as many of you, you probably know better the history of the Amish emigrating to the U.S. better than I do, and the cultural and religious isolation that they partake in, as well as the interfaith marriage. They're also large families in the Amish. And for genetic studies, these are really wonderful for being able to identify genetic components of diseases. And because glaucoma is a largely genetic or heritable disease, we thought this would be a really wonderful opportunity to do something that really hasn't been done before. So studying genetics of glaucoma in the Amish. And we, in general, we know that, again, glaucoma is highly heritable, but also if there is that lifestyle or environmental component, because of the more conservative lifestyle and environmental exposures that Amish individuals undergo, that would be contributing in a different way versus if we were to study, for instance, I'm in Cleveland, so folks in Cleveland. And we hope that we'll be able to better understand the particular glaucoma that affects the Amish, as well as genes that might contribute. So our real goal was, our first goal was to understand the prevalence and risk factors of glaucoma in Amish communities in Ohio. Our first aim of our one of our grants was to ascertain or engage and enroll with Amish individuals in Ohio for primary open-angle glaucoma, which is the most common type. And then we wanted to genetically characterize glaucoma in this Amish, essentially large family. This is very different than a lot of the other genetic studies that we work on. And there are some very special considerations for working with this community. And rather than tell you what our enrollment folks, our enrollment experts do, they're actually going to tell you themselves. So Sherry and Sarada are going to talk to you about what community outreach looks like for this study. Let's see. Are y'all on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I will mute myself and let you talk. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sarada Fazell, and I work, I've worked for Dr. Haynes doing community outreach and ascertainment in the Amish community for the past, it'll be 8 years next May. And I've worked on a variety of studies before working on the pilot for the glaucoma project. And before Jessica started the glaucoma project, I noticed we were doing a macular degeneration study and a protective variant study, sort of a aging and memory study. I noticed that a lot of people had reported a family history of glaucoma, or they had macular degeneration and glaucoma. And I remember at one point it really came on my radar because I took somebody to have an eye exam for the macular degeneration study, and the ophthalmologist noted that this person was glaucoma suspect, and they had sort of a high intraocular pressure. And they turned to me because they get, at the end of the exam, they get this report basically. And they looked terrified. And I said, well, what's wrong? And they said, well, it says that they suspect I have glaucoma, and are my eyes going to explode? And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, from the pressure. And I said, well, that's not what that means. That's not how that works. But so that, anyway, that started a discussion with this person, and I found that they had a family history of it, but they didn't really understand what it meant. And then a little bit after that, Jessica started talking to us about doing the pilot for glaucoma. And so what I did was, looked at who had it in their families that we knew about. And then as we were enrolling new people, also talked to them about, do you have this in your family? And people were really open and interested and willing to help. So in the beginning, we were able to enroll, I think, 12 people for the pilot from areas in Wayne, Holmes, and sort of all around this little red highlighted county here in Ohio is Holmes County, for those of you who don't know. And I think that worked out very well. And people got, you know, a better idea of what the disease meant. And they found having the eye exams very helpful. So that, you know, I think that in terms of community engagement, whenever you can give something back to the community, in other words, you're giving them an eye exam, you're helping them with whatever they're dealing with, whether it's their genetics or their, you know, an actual like macular degeneration or glaucoma. It's helpful, and it encourages continued engagement and kind of builds trust, because you're not just saying, okay, tell me about whatever your medical history is. You're also saying, okay, this is in your family, or you have it, or you think you have it, and let's go to a doctor and let's look at it. So that, I think that was the process that started it. And then after that, really, Skarie did most of the recruitment. So I'll let her speak to that.
Yes, so I am Skarie Hostetler. I have worked for Jessica and Dr. Haynes for almost 4 years, actually. And my main goal is recruitment. So what Sarada said with our studies prior to this, we have found people that have glaucoma in their family history. And so what we use is we use something we call SAGA, the Swiss Anabaptist Genealogy Association. And we find all of those people and their families really that are connected to the one person who might have said that they have glaucoma, or said a mother or father has glaucoma. And then from there, we also use the Ohio Amish directory, and that gives us addresses and family members and birth dates and all of the information that we need to go actually door to door. We knock on doors and tell them about our study. We explain what we're doing to them. And typically they have questions. They're pretty open. From there, you either make an appointment to come back. They'll say no, they're not interested, or they're too busy. That's often with this age group, they were often very busy. Or they'll say, I have time right now, just come on in. And so that then is, typically it's me sitting around the table with the participant, and I explain in depth like the consent and what they're consenting to. And I explain more in depth the study that we're doing and what's involved with the study. So I work really hard to make really positive connection and to have really pleasant conversation with the participants. I think it's partly a PR job that I work really hard to have really positive interactions. We talk about anything that comes up, you know, gardening and children, and there's always local stories going on, and so we hash out the local stories, and then after that we work through the enrollment paperwork, which is what somebody else will probably talk about. And from there, we have some work to do as far as scheduling some samples. So I'll come back to their house and we'll take samples and send them to Case Western, and then also scheduling with Dr. Scarie's office, making sure that we know as far as transportation, how they're going to get to where they need to go, if that needs to be me that transports. So we do a lot of just coordinating, making sure everything happens. And then the dissemination with all of that is, we have a newsletter that goes out about every 2 years. That includes the studies that we do with Dr. Haynes as well. So that way they know what we're doing, and they can kind of keep up on that. And the Amish have a way of just broadcasting news just through word of mouth. So just the backyard news spreading that happens a lot. And so it's been long enough that I've been doing this now that they'll know who I am just from the connections in the community, and they'll know what I'm doing. So that's super helpful. So, and again, that's why all the conversations need to be pleasant and just positive interactions. Oh, that's what we do.
All right, then so once the patients are recruited and set it up, my office, if you can see my cursor, it's in Richland County, which is close-ish to Holmes County. It's easier than going up to Cleveland for a lot of these patients. So I think that was somewhat of an advantage where we could get participants to be involved in the study. But we really put them through a pretty extensive eye exam when they came over. And so this was a little different than my average, clinic day working with the Amish. They often came over in van loads, anywhere from 2 to 8 at a time. And we would take two participants at a time and run them through all of our testing equipment. We couldn't really handle more than 2 at a time because we have so many tests to do that, we have to kind of be aware of that. And really, it was a pretty long visit for everybody. It takes about 2 hours to kind of get through all of the exam tests. But we're checking their glasses, we're looking at their eyes, we're checking their eye pressures, taking several measurements of the eyes, doing those visual fields to check their peripheral vision, assessing the nerve tissue. Really doing a very, very comprehensive eye test. These exams, and when I'd see glaucoma patients, typically, these are things that we spread out over, 2, 3, maybe even 4 appointments, just because it gets to be a lot. But just with transportation and making sure we got a complete picture, we did all this in one visit. And everyone was great. It was, like I said, a long visit, but all the participants were really, really good. And, I think they're appreciative of, hearing about these things. And I always made sure to leave plenty of time at the end to go through everything in good detail with them. We did have a number of, kind of so-called normals or, no glaucoma people come to serve as a control population for us for the study as well. So often there wasn't a lot to have to go through. Their eyes were very healthy, but, they still appreciated kind of seeing the images and hearing about everything that we went through. And then, also I was very careful to communicate with their regular eye doctors if they had them. One-time visits for glaucoma are not sufficient for actually treating or monitoring it. So we need to make sure that, they're getting their regular eye follow-up and communicating with them. And then we were always happy to give them, a prescription for new glasses if they wanted it. With the extent of the exam, it was typically would be several $100 type of exam that would be billed towards insurance or other, however they typically pay for healthcare. And so, it's very rewarding to be able to do all this and just in general, but then also collect all this information for the study. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. It's not as needed for this presentation, but we were able to examine over 90 participants, and we have a larger database through some of Dr. Haynes's work. COVID, just like everything else in the world, it hit kind of right in the middle of our recruitment. So I think we were on track for probably much closer to 150 or 200 patients when COVID hit, but then that really slowed things down. But what we found was not unsurprising. Basically, we tried to make sure to study a number of people with glaucoma and a number without. Really nothing in what I found was surprising. It's definitely running in their families. There's a lot of self-reported, family history. And then all the metrics, like I said, are very typical for what we see in glaucoma patients. So, this was encouraging for us that there wasn't a unusual form of glaucoma that they had. This is something that, should definitely benefit the Amish population, but also be, fairly applicable to, more general populations in terms of what glaucoma is and how it affects people. So that was most of the clinical data, and I'll turn it back over to the rest of the team to kind of go through the other parts of the information that we were looking into.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Funk. I'm a research assistant. I worked with Dr. Cooke Bailey for about 1.5 years now, and I just kind of work on a bunch of different projects, whatever is needed. And I'm grateful that I got to work on this project because it's so interesting to see how glaucoma and lifestyle environmental factors all come together in the Amish population. And it's really interesting to see what manifests out of this data that we were able to collect. So in this slide, you can just see the self-reported medical conditions of the Amish that we surveyed. The most common were osteoarthritis, hypertension, and migraines. But the most interesting thing to note here is that all of these prevalences that we found in our population are much lower than what you would see in the general population. So for example, you have hypertension in those over 40, our age range was 40 to 89. And in the general population, according to the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, about 74% of people age 60 and over have hypertension. So our study is much lower, as you can see here. And the same trend occurs in osteoarthritis and especially in diabetes, as well as migraines. And you can go to the next slide. And here are some selected results from the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which was also used to survey the Amish participants to get a greater depth of idea of what their lifestyle is like and what things they may be struggling with outside of medical conditions. So in this slide, I briefly wanted to highlight some things. The Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index is a self-rated questionnaire that assesses sleep quality and disturbances over a 1-month time period. And as you can see, most of our respondents experience good quality sleep overall. And if participants were experiencing sleep disturbances, it was due to 2 factors, which I've highlighted here on the slide, which were waking up in the middle of the night or early morning, or getting up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. And you can go to the next slide. And here I just wanted to pull some of more interesting findings that we were able to collect in our population. So as you can see, the average minutes of daily physical activity is very high. We have 379 minutes on average with a standard deviation of 208, as well as most people getting their drinking water from a well or a spring. And people were most likely to be exposed to chemical fertilizers at 37.4%. And they were kind of spread out in the number of caffeinated drinks that they consumed on a daily basis. As you can see, it's kind of even spread there. And most people were turning to coffee over tea or soft drinks when they were choosing to drink a caffeinated beverage. So those are some of the lifestyle and environmental factors that contributed to our study. I'll turn it back to Dr. Cooke Bailey.
Thank you. So I think you can see that what we've done here is a really comprehensive look at the Amish participants. We are asking questions about sleep, about lifestyle, about environment. We also were able to get blood samples for DNA analysis. And we had lots of family history questions, personal medical history, family medical history. And so what this creates is a really robust data set that we really are excited to work with and excited to kind of figure out what trends we're seeing. One of the things that is really interesting about working with the Amish is the large families, and being able to look at these large families, what are called pedigrees, shown here on the slide, where squares are males, circles are females, and then you have generations from the top, and then the middle, and then the bottom in each one of these little figures. each, like the red square means that Dr. Skarie examined the individual, and then there's different designations below each person that indicates whether another ophthalmologist had noted that they had glaucoma or whether they self-reported in Dr. Haynes's prior studies that they had glaucoma. Looking at all this information together is really interesting to see, you know, the consistency between self-reported glaucoma with Dr. Skarie's exams, and then also to see how this disease runs in families. Now, you'll notice that we don't have a lot of earlier generation data, and that generally is because the parents are deceased. But what is exciting is that because of the general trend in staying local, we can enroll or ascertain individuals in the next generation down. And since glaucoma onset can start as early as 40, we're really interested to be able to work with multiple generations. So you can see in parts E and F of the figure that we actually have multi-generation primary open-angle glaucoma. And that helps us to better understand the genetics of the disease. Now, if we take all of the Amish family data that we have from the various sources that both Sherry and Sarada mentioned, we can create this giant pedigree that shows all of the multiple generations going back to their emigration from Switzerland and Germany. And this information is, yeah, it looks like, you know, a lot of scribbling, but it's really helpful for us to do genetic studies to be able to understand what parts of the genome might be contributing to glaucoma. So if we look at the sample that we were able to enroll for GLEAM to date, we have approximately 21% that did have glaucoma, approximately 60% that were female. And then you could see here kind of our distribution of age at exam, obviously starting at 40, and then our oldest person was early 90s. Most of the individuals were in their late 60s or early 70s. And let's see. So when we take that information together with the genetic information that we're able to obtain from the DNA samples that I mentioned, we can do lots of complex analyses. I'm not going to walk you through this complicated figure, but suffice it to say that we have experts here that know how to work with this type of genetic data, and we're really fortunate to be able to work with folks that know how to analyze this and utilize it to learn more about the genetics of glaucoma. So far, this is very, very new. We have been able to localize a genetic variant, a genetic region that seems to be associated with glaucoma in the Amish. And we're really excited to follow this up and figure out if what this might mean. And one of the other really exciting things that we've been able to do is to look at known glaucoma variants that have been identified to date in other populations and look at whether or not in general Amish with and without glaucoma have a similar, what we call genetic risk load for those. And what we're seeing here, the yellow versus the blue, is that in general, Amish with glaucoma do seem to have a little bit of a higher risk allele load. And so than Amish without glaucoma. And so that tells us that it's possible that the genetic profile is similar to other groups that have been studied. And so now we can take that information and better localize genetic signals that might actually be functional or targetable in the future. Okay. So far, our study has given us detailed information on environmental risk factors or exposures in Amish that we've worked with, and we've started to really figure out what the glaucoma profile looks like in this group. As Dr. Skarie said, we really were affected by COVID negatively, but thankfully we did still have, I mean, our amazing ascertainment team was still able to go out and get some participants post-COVID. Where we're going now is we want to compare the data that we have with other populations, data from other populations, and then we really want, hope to use the genetic information to understand what is genetically contributing to glaucoma. Eventually, we would love to expand the study to look at progression of glaucoma. So thinking back to that graph that Dr. Skarie showed earlier in the presentation about intervening earlier and preserving vision earlier, we hope to be able to contribute in that space. We would love to be able to learn something about treatment response and progression by treatment type. That's way down the line once we're able to expand this study. And then we would, again, love to be able to figure out how genetics, environment, and lifestyle might interact to affect glaucoma status. We obviously are very grateful to the Bright Focus Foundation. That's who funded a large majority of this work, as well as the Clinical Translational Science Collaborative of Cleveland, Dr. Haynes, for letting us tag on to the work that he was doing, as well as several other funding sources here. Most of all, though, we really are thankful to the Amish families for participating in and contributing to this study. This was a little different than some of the other studies that have been done in this community, and we were really thankful that they were open to working with us and to kind of doing something a little bit different. And then this is our kind of current research team, all the folks that are involved. You heard from several of us today, but just know that there are lots of other folks that contribute to this work who weren't able to be on today. And I do have to take a moment to acknowledge Denise Ozell, who was instrumental in starting this work. She passed away last month, and we missed her dearly. She was such a bright light on our team and really embodied the spirit of working with the Amish and integrating into the community. And so I've included some pictures here of her with our team, just to, you know, give us a moment to acknowledge, oh yeah, this one's even during COVID. She was logging in, and we just really, really miss her and appreciate what she was able to contribute to the study. So thank you all so much for your attention. We're excited to, you know, talk with you about what this means and where it's going. Thanks.